So I assume that your research methodologies are much better now than they were, and you have the capability to get started earlier, so the results must be better. Is that true?
Yes. I mean, at times. I mean, it varies from case to case. But yeah, I mean, Ian was often having to study some cases years after the events took place. And
Yeah.
of course, for the most part, he was doing it through a translator,
Right.
which and is in cultures with a general belief in reincarnation, where the families, some of them, were hoping for their, say, deceased relative to come back. So,
Right.
I mean, all that being said, some of his cases are very strong, but there are potential weak points for a lot of the others. So yeah, I mean, now I focus on the American ones because we don't have to worry about cultural influences.
Yes.
And we are getting to them sooner. I mean, we've done sort of more outreach or getting the word out more than Ian certainly did for a long time, and the internet. So,
Yes.
if people have a 5-year-old who's talking about a past life, if they start Googling, it doesn't take them long to find us. So yeah, we're finding cases earlier, which is a real strength, except there are many of the kids who don't want to talk to us regardless of what age they are. So in that case, it hardly matters. But even then, the parents' memories of what the child has said, are much fresher. And with the American ones, they're more likely to have written stuff down. So yes, all those things make for stronger cases.
Yeah, beautiful. And I've often seen the figure 2,500 cases. In some places, I've seen 3,000 cases. I'm a bit of a nitpicker. I'd like to know, how many cases do you really have on record?
Well, it depends what you count as a case. So
Yeah, right.
with the criteria we use now, there are some of the old ones that we have deregistered. I mean, they were studied, but we don't put them in our database that we use for analysis. So in that sense, it does get a little murky. But I would say between 2,500 and 3,000 is a reasonable estimate.
All right, and I saw somewhere that you're getting about 100 new cases a year. Is that about right?
Yeah, well, lately, yes, we got that last year, and then we're on a pace for more than that this year. But these are cases, I mean, these are American cases of varying strength. I mean, the tricky part is a child may talk a great deal about a past life, but if they don't give the right details, then they're unverifiable. So you have to kind of have names or places or something to try to verify it. And there are cases, well, with the American reports, I mean, most of them we don't go and research because there's nothing to research, basically. So the really good meaty ones are kind of few and far between, but we're getting more because we're getting more in general.
Yeah, and it's going to get more and more over time, I'm sure. I mean, I've just noticed in the small circles where I've had conversations with various people, there's been one case where a friend of mine remembers having such memories of being a fireman when he was a little boy, and some friends of mine over in the UK that have had a niece or something that was also making those sorts of claims. So it looks like you don't have to dig too far, and these cases are actually quite common in a sense.
Well, they are, and we don't really know how common, because we haven't done sort of a survey to nail down that number. We did a sort of a pilot survey. There's a survey center here at the university, and you can, for money, you can pay to have questions added on to their survey. So we did one where we had an add-on for asking parents if their child remembered a past life, and this was for 5 surrounding counties of Charlottesville. So it's a fairly diverse group. Anyway,
okay. Yeah.
6% of parents said they'd had a child who talked about a past life, which was so much higher than I expected that I don't know whether to believe the number. So at some point, we'd like to do a full nationwide survey and make sure that what they're calling a past life statement is what we would call a past life statement. So it would need to be a more involved survey. But
yeah.
Now, there was one done in India a long time ago, which got 1 out of 450, which of course is a lot less common. But the methods that they could use, were, I mean, they admitted they may well have missed cases. It was much more sort of an informal method. So anyway, we don't have a good sense of it. But even 1 out of 450, I mean, with, we've got 300 million people here. I mean, that's still a lot of cases. And, whenever I give talks, I mean, it's more commonly than not, somebody comes up and tells me they had a family member with these kinds of memories. Now, of course, that's kind of a selected audience, but it's certainly out there.
Yeah, I can see already in the way that you are very accurate about the way you express things. Is the scientific mindset comes out very clearly. I had to laugh in Consciousness Unbound, where you said, "Oh, we found cases on every continent of the world, except Antarctica," no. Right? Well, just to be sure.
Yeah, you don't want people to say, you claim every continent, but do you really have cases in Antarctica? So, sometimes you're trying to remove complaints that people have.
That's the rigorous method, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So now, since you've taken over as the director of DOPS, which is, since what year was that?
2014.
2014, okay. And of course now you've got everything's been codified on your database, and you've got the power of computers to be able to crunch those numbers and draw patterns out of that data. What are some of the unique findings that you've uncovered?
Well, one that we've uncovered that I find quite interesting is, so we've always known that more boys talk about past life than girls. Is about 62% in our database. And we've kind of wondered why that is, and Ian would speculate at times. So another way of looking at that question is, why are there more past lives as males than females? Because 90% of the kids talk about a past life as a member of the same sex. In fact, it's the same percentage, 62% of the past lives are male. Well, when we look at it with the database, what we see is that in the natural death cases, it's 50-50. It's in the unnatural death, murder, suicide, combat accident, those sorts of things, where we get more male. In fact, it's 73% male. Well, in the general population, more unnatural deaths are also males, because males engage in more high-risk behaviors.
Risky activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. They drive motorcycles or run too fast or get in knife fights or whatever else.
Yeah.
So I looked at the data, and I was able to find 5 years worth of data from the CDC here in the U.S. And it came with a number of 72% of unnatural deaths are male, and that's compared to 73% in our database. So if you look at mode of death, our percentages by the sexes agree completely what you would expect if, in fact, this is a sample of lives from the past.
Yeah. Okay. Right. All right. So that it kind of confirms the past life theory more solidly then.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and again, you'd never see that on an individual case level. You can only see it by looking at it at the database.
Okay.
Another thing we've looked at lately is, in fact, we published a paper a while back on gender nonconformity. So, I said 90% of our cases is a life as a member of the same sex, but we can look at the other 10%. So many of them show what's called gender nonconformity. So in the general population, most young children show what's called gender typical behaviors, and it's really stereotypical behaviors, but where boys more likely to play with trucks or girls with dolls. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about why that is, obviously, what goes into that. But in the general population, about 3% of young boys and 5% of young girls show gender nonconformity, where they show behaviors more consistent with the opposite sex. When our cases of the children who remember life as a member of the opposite sex, 80% of them show gender nonconformity.
Right.
So again, that's a kind of a behavioral type of memory that fits in with the idea that there's been some kind of carryover from a past life.
Okay. So in the forward progress of your work and investigation in this field, where do you really hope to go with this? What do you further really want to delve into, and what would you really love to uncover more about?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to do is, sometimes people ask why study more cases, but I think if we could get, I think strong American cases can still make a difference. So,
Yeah.
If we had 50 American cases as strong as the strongest ones, James Leininger's a well-known case. Remember being a World War II pilot. If we have 50 like that with clear documentation of what the child said, and it's an obscure person from a long time ago, and we're able to track them down and so forth, I think that can have an impact. So I certainly want to continue to do that. And then I want to use the database both for things that kind of address the question of, is it a past life they're remembering, but also trying to look at patterns of kind of how the thing might work. So,
Yeah.
if you die violently, are you more likely to come back, say, sooner, or come back more nearby, or whatever, looking at the various things of how this whole thing might work.
Yeah. So ultimately, working towards a working model of what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
And how, so what sort of new information might you uncover, do you think, that can bring that about?
Well, again, it would be looking at sort of patterns.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
we mentioned that some kids remember a life from 60 years ago, and others remember one from 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago. So what leads to that? And then, of course, it could be intermediate lives. But are there patterns probably in the past life that would make it more likely there'd be a longer interval? The problem is with the old case, it's hard to get a lot of information sometimes about the about the previous person. But with the advent of the internet, it's amazing what you can find online, which is a double-edged sword for us, but it does give us an opportunity sometimes either to verify more from the past life or to learn more about that person.
Do you think there's any value? The way I'm starting to see it now is at a certain point, you no longer really have to prove that this is a real phenomenon, right? And in a sense, regardless of whether you can solve a case or not, you can still get. Obviously, it's not as strong when it's not solved, and people could just be making stuff up. But allowing for that, and then again drawing that kind of data and finding the patterns and the consistencies, there would still be some value in that, wouldn't you think?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, about a third of the cases in our database are unverified or unsolved, and different cases may be caused by different things. I mean, I read some that are unverifiable, but I'm quite struck by. And then there are others where I have to wonder, is it fantasy or is sort of wishful thinking on the parents if if it involves a deceased relative or something. So it's just harder to tell with the unverified cases. But yes, I do think there can be value in those.
Yeah.
So we continue to hear from a lot of parents, and most of the time it is unverifiable.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's still an interesting, often a very interesting phenomenon.